Hi. Oh, this is a cool filter. This is the screencast on the respiratory system. It's a little bit disjointed in terms of how it's covering the different topics because some of the crash course covers stuff that I cover in the lecture in the middle, like before. So yeah, but hopefully you can connect them all together and enjoy. Bye.
The water through their membranes. And they did it through simple diffusion, when a material automatically flows from where it is concentrated to where it is less concentrated, so it balances out. Diffusion works really well, and it requires zero effort, but it wasn't going to cut it in the big leagues. Anything larger than a small worm is simply too big and needs too much oxygen for diffusion to work. So in order to get bigger, early life forms needed a circulatory system that could move bulk amounts of oxygen around faster inside their bodies, and a respiratory system to bring more oxygen in contact with their wet membranes. So their respiratory surfaces moved from their outer surfaces to the insides of their bodies. First there were gills.
So we see the importance of the two systems working together here, right? We talked a little bit about that last class, but just a reiteration. And today we're going to talk about how exactly they're working together. Yeah, so let me go forward to the next clip. 43. All right, lungs.
I'm talking about lungs. Wet lungs. With an efficient new way to take in nearly limitless amounts of oxygen from air, animals were eventually able to get bigger and more diverse over the ages, and now all of us lung-having vertebrates share that common ancestor. For lots of animals, including humans, those lungs come with a bunch of other equipment like protective ribs, a stiff trachea, and in mammals, a strong diaphragm. And together, they form your respiratory system, which happens to be best friends and business partners with your circulatory system. It's only by working together and using both the bulk flow and simple diffusion of oxygen that they can make possible the process of cellular respiration. In other words, life itself. So a lot of improvements have been made to it over the eons, but the respiratory system that you are using right now is your inheritance from that ancient, ambitious fish, leader of one of the most important anatomical revolutions of the past 500 million years.
Hello, everyone. So today we're talking about the respiratory system, the system that works hand in hand with the circulatory. Both of them, as Hank Green says from Crash Course, are business partners. They do everything together. So we're asking today, why do we need a respiratory system? What does it do? So we're starting with some stuff that we've sort of covered before in terms of cellular respiration. So here we have a picture of a cell and we have food going into it. So what does it do? There we go. So we need to gain O2 into our system. If you remember correctly, that's part of cellular respiration. Okay. And you need it to make ATP, which is energy. And we need to expel CO2. We talked about how in the circulatory system, blood is taken away from the heart that has high CO2 levels and left in the lungs. So we're expelling it, we're breathing it out. Yes, so it's also a waste product it is the waste product from cellular respiration. Excretion, yeah, we're getting rid of it. So there's the O2 going in, there's the ATP coming out, and there's the CO2 coming out of the cell. And the whole point is to maintain homeostasis of gases, which can cause a lot of problems if it is not maintained, so it's important. So we have two levels of the respiratory system. We have ventilation, which is the large scale, which is just breathing in and out. It's the bulk movement of gases. So at any given time you are doing this, your cells are taking in oxygen and they are giving off, or they're trying to expel CO2. So this is happening all the time. It happens a large scale. We're not just taking one breath every 15 minutes. We're doing this all the time. And it's an involuntary function of our body. Yeah, and what is a ventilator? So we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So what is a ventilator? This was a slide that was from previous years of Science 9, but I thought it was particularly important now because of COVID and the fact that ventilators are actually few and far between in a lot of places. So basically it's like forcing you to breathe, right? It's like a mechanical breathing machine. So if you are having trouble, or if your body's having trouble breathing, a ventilator can help with that. So if you want to pause it and look at the details more here in the image on the bottom, I'm not going to go really that far into it, but you just have to remember that without ventilation, without our respiratory system, we couldn't continue, right? We couldn't keep living because we need those gases to come in, the O2 to come in and the CO2 to leave, in order to keep cellular respiration happening in a healthy way. So COVID-19 disrupts the respiratory system for many people, which is why they're having to put them on the ventilators. So I thought you guys maybe would think that was interesting just because it seems very relevant right now. But I'm going to keep going though. So how does it do it? So we're talking ventilation, like we said, and then gas exchange. So that's the second part of it. We already talked about diffusion, if you remember correctly. So what happens is there's a diffusion of gas molecules between tissues across membranes. Okay, so externally, the air goes between the lungs and the blood. So for getting the CO2 out, and internally, the O2 is going between blood and tissues. So you have this image in the corner of this could be any sort of artery, vein, capillary, probably more on the capillary side. I see the word there too. So the O2, right, is being absorbed, is being diffused into the, this image could be of a lot of places, right? But let's say it's going into your kidneys. How about that? All right, so it could be going into your kidneys, and then the CO2 is going out back into the blood here. Everyone sees that. So again, you can pause it if you want to look a little bit closer. We're going to talk more about this. So structure dictates function for gas exchange. So the large surface area of the alveoli and blood vessels. So there's another slide in a second about what an alveoli looks like, but basically it's in your lung. It's where the diffusion happens of the oxygen, okay, to get into your bloodstream. And it maximizes the rate of gas exchange by diffusion. So I don't like the word moist. I think a lot of people don't like it, but these moist membranes, like the alveoli, they're moist, right? And it helps maintain the balance of the oxygen coming in and the CO2 coming out. Okay, so if you do end up watching the crash course video, he talks a lot about how the beginning of time, like the original mammals, animals, etc., mostly fish, they were doing diffusion through their skin because they were small enough animals or small enough organisms that they, A, could keep their skin moist, which is important for diffusion, and B, they were small enough that they could get the amount of oxygen they needed through diffusion on their skin. But because we're such big organisms, and think about rhinoceri, I don't know how to say the plural, elephants, like huge mammals like that, they have to use the bulk breathing in and out in order to get enough oxygen to be to fuel cellular respiration. All right, here we have the alveoli, I'm saying it wrong. I thought this was a good image down here. I don't know, guys. I know you said that the bar. Okay, there we go. So we have these tiny capillaries. If you remember correctly, this is tiny, tiny. All right. You can look up how big that is in comparison to a centimeter, but you barely could see it, right? So these are super small. They stay moist, so they can take in the oxygen, they can diffuse in oxygen and out CO2. So this is a microscopic image on the right. They're pretty amazing. Yeah, so they have super thin walls too, just one cell thick. And that's why the diffusion can happen. There are so many things happening on my screen. And they're surrounded by capillaries, yes, which are those little tiny blood vessels. So we've talked a bit about cellular respiration. When we talked about photosynthesis, we talked that the opposite is cellular respiration. So basically, it's glucose and oxygen. combining, and the waste products are carbon dioxide and water. So when you're breathing out, there's actually water vapor coming out as well as carbon dioxide. So glucose comes from, if we were in class, I would say, what does glucose come from? Wait. And then someone would probably say food. Okay, so we get our glucose from food. That fuels the cellular respiration. This right here, the second bullet point is the chemical formula, the brain fart. Obviously we know that it produces energy. So for us all to function, as I've said before, is we need oxygen, we need glucose, and we need cellular respiration to happen. If it doesn't happen, it takes very, very little time for our bodies to stop working. So it makes ATP, we know that too, and ATP is a molecule that living things use for energy. Okay. So I'm just going to run through this. You can pause if you want to, but this isn't as important as the other stuff. The ATP energy is stored in the bonds in the molecule. When the ATP bonds are broken, energy that the body can use is released. Okay. You can see this image here. There's a breaking happening. There's energy being released. And then, then we have energy we can use. And this is the last image from Crash Course. You can watch this video if you want to. He talks in very high detail about things. We are more looking at the function, as I was mentioning last class. We're worried about what happened to the runner, how her systems function, and thinking about the question: Did the runner have enough oxygen, or was there some sort of issue with her oxygen level? All right, cool. I will see you all in class. And bye. This is a little bit of extra information from Hank explaining the alveoli and their function. So there's an image to go with it.
This is where the actual gas exchange occurs, and everything you find here has a form to suit that function. So the smaller branches of the upside-down tree are bronchioles, which taper down into progressively narrower tubes until they empty into the alveolar ducts, and then dead end into tiny alveolar sacs, where the bulk of the gas exchange finally occurs. Because that's where each sac contains a cluster of alveoli, these tiny cavities lined with super thin wet membranes made of simple squamous epithelium tissue. It's here that oxygen molecules dissolve in the wet mucus, diffuse across the epithelial cells, and then cross the single layer of endothelial cells lining the capillaries to enter the bloodstream. And of course, it's also where carbon dioxide diffuses out of the blood and then follows the same route back up to the nose and mouth where it's exhaled. So it's your alveoli where diffusion meets bulk flow, because while you're picking up oxygen and dispensing with CO2 one molecule at a time, you're doing it in enormous quantities at any given second. Both of your lungs